My name's Chip Pocock with Buckner Companies out of Graham, North Carolina. Thank you all for coming to the presentation, which is going to be primarily on the new crane and derrick standard, subpart CC, as it is now known. Subpart N, which is the old crane and derrick standard, was replaced by subpart CC, which went into effect last year, November, I believe. I'm going to turn the thing over here in just a few minutes to these two gentlemen over in the corner, who I have the honor of speaking with today. Ted Blanton from the North American Crane Bureau, and Steve Green with NCCER. And the portions of the new standard that I think are important to those of us that work in this industry are the crane operator certification part, the qualified rigger issue that OSHA put in the standard, and the signal person standard, or the signal person portion of the standard. What I wanted to talk about before I turn the mic and stuff over to Ted and Steve is the fact that SEAA was represented on the Crane and Derrick Advisory Committee, and I had the honor of doing that. And there was a number of other people from within our industry. The president of Buckner, Doug Williams, was on the committee. He represented the Specialized Carriers and Riggers Association, and there was some other folks from the Ironworkers International, Frank Migliaccio, Darlene Taylor with Century Steel out of Pittsburgh was on the CDAC committee, representing a group of union steel erectors. But the bottom line is that those of us that are impacted and affected by new regulations were represented on the committee. And the committee met, we met 12 times. We met for almost a week every month over that 12-month period, and in a large room in the Department of Labor, and there was 21 or 22 of us on the committee. We set on, at meeting number one, we set a set of ground rules of what we had to, how many people of the 22 had to agree to reach consensus, because there's some things that are in the standard that we don't all agree with, but it's the closest we could come to an agreement, and so it is what it is. We all didn't get everything we wanted. As an example, and I told those guys with Pike Electric this last night, some of it might have been a little Crown Royal talking, but I told them that I wanted to see, I pushed for all overhead power lines to be put underground. I thought we ought to put them underground. I mean, it just makes sense. When you think about maintenance, hurricanes, ice storms, all the things that impact us in the eastern states and in the Gulf states, you eliminate all that. You eliminate, all these overhead power lines are an eyesore and everything else. And as far as I'm concerned, we pay for it as end users of electricity. But obviously that dog didn't hunt over that year. Again, the important part of understanding subpart CC is the fact that it was a negotiated rule, and that those of us that are in the industry and are affected had a voice at the table, and at the end, all 22 of us had to raise our hands and say, yeah, we agree, this is it, and sign the document as a consensus document. So that form of rulemaking, in my opinion, is what we need more of. It's Ronald Reagan believed in it. It was his idea to use negotiated rulemaking, and that the government shouldn't just sit up there and make standards and laws and expect businesses and folks to abide by them when OSHA and other government agencies don't really truly understand the industry that they're impacting. With that being said, I wanted to tell you a little bit about I mentioned qualified rigger. Qualified rigger ended up in the standard. It got put in there by OSHA. There was a 6-year period where from the time we reached consensus in 2004 until the standard went into effect. And a large part of that was politics. There's some stuff in the standard that one or two groups outside of the group that was on the CDAC committee didn't agree with. And they had a huge amount of influence in the then Bush White House. And they came to the meetings and gave public comment to the CDAC committee. And outside the doors of the room told several of us, point blank, that if we put operator certification as a requirement in this new standard, that the standard would never see the light of day as long as there was a president from Texas in the White House. And they held true to that. And that's how strong politics are in this country. Despite 2008 in my opinion was one of the bloodiest years in the construction industry with cranes that I can remember in quite some time. It probably hadn't gotten that much press since Big Blue went down in Milwaukee. And what year was that, Ted? Probably 90s, yeah. But 2008 was a bloody year. I mean, you had the two big tower crane accidents in New York City. There was the accident in Miami where a couple guys from Bovis were killed when a jacking section came off the hook and went through the construction office. I mean, and the list goes on and on. You know, the hopes of the CDAC committee was that through that process and through the process of negotiated rulemaking, that in the end it would stop a lot of the local laws and ordinances that went into play at that same time from going into effect, so that, you know, a guy like Ed Valencia working in a job in Miami doesn't have to meet some kind of higher standard working in Dade County than he would working in Charlotte. But he better not come to Charlotte anyway. That's ours. But that was the point of having a good new federal standard. Unfortunately, what happened is Miami-Dade County did try to put into some new crane regulations, and I think they were partially successful. Philadelphia, Maryland, Maryland State, OSHA, and several other locales did something in reaction to the non-action of OSHA in bringing in this new crane standard. So we were only partially successful. Hopefully we're beyond that. But very specifically because of the tower crane accident in New York City and the tower crane accident in Miami, federal OSHA decided that there needed to be language in a new standard that addressed a qualified rigger. We objected to that position in the CDAC hearings because we felt like we were addressing everything from the hook back and not the hook down. If you want something to address the hook down, then you need to put it in subpart H of the OSHA standards, which is materials handling, which is where your sling charts are and everything like that. After CDAC was disbanded and the document's sitting there in limbo, it's already been through the public comment phases. These accidents in 2008 happen, and OSHA makes really 10 significant changes, one of which was the addition of language about qualified riggers. My personal belief is that the qualified rigger section of the standard doesn't have a tremendous impact for us in this room, because most of what we do is covered by subpart R. And subpart R has had language for qualified rigger in it since it went into effect in 2000. Okay? These gentlemen are going to explain a little bit more detail of what the new standard contains, and probably just as importantly, if not more importantly, they're going to talk about some avenues that NCCER has available to help with issues like operator certification, the signal person, and the rigging standard. And if we need testimonials, Ed Valencia with LPR in the back can certainly do it. They're using NCCER program and curriculum now. Jerry Cagle, who's in the room, helped write the original ironworker curriculum with NCCER back probably 10 years or more ago. That curriculum is being updated, and in fact, Volume 1 is complete. We're working on the second level, or Level 1. Level 2 is in the final comment phases and putting some more stuff together there. So if you're not familiar with what NCCER has to offer for craft worker training, whether it be iron worker, crane operator, rigger, or signal person, they're gonna talk about it here in just a few minutes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ted Blanton.
Good afternoon. My name is Ted Blanton, as Chip said, and I wanted to make sure you knew the short one was Ted and the tall one is Steve. And what I'm going to talk about is the OSHA standards and how they kind of impact your industry. But I want you to understand that I'm not an attorney, so what I'm telling you is my opinion of the standards and how we interpret the standards and how we interpret it based on reading it and applying it back to the preamble, how OSHA brought it out. Plus talking with a lot of compliance officers, etc. I wanted to be an attorney, but they had a minimum height requirement. I couldn't make it, so it was the end of it. So if any of you are you know, like vertically challenged, I'm only talking about me, not about you. So we're going to talk about the 1419 for signals, 14, 20, 21, and 22. Those are all about communications. And then we're going to hit the 27, which is operator certification, and we'll hit the 28, which is signal person qualifications, and then the 1429 requirement about training. The qualified rigger portion comes in this in a couple of these different areas. Qualified riggers are required for assembly and disassembly and in rigging materials in the fall zone. As Chip talked about on the qualified riggers, it's kind of a you made a comment, and it's absolutely right about it falling over in the material handling portion of the standard. One of the reasons OSHA didn't put qualifications in here was because they did in the end realize that they needed to write it for the other side of the fence, because that's where it needs to be. So in our discussions, and Steve and I had met with OSHA a few months back, last year, towards the end of November, I believe it was, wasn't it? And we'd sat down with the then Director of Construction Safety and his guy who is helping to draft the OSHA's guidelines for how to, a compliance directive to how to enforce this, because they have not got that compliance directive out yet. So as it stands right now, and typically they don't know how to enforce it yet. They're not totally familiar with the standards. Now I'll get into that a little bit as I go through. But anyway, to make this a thumbnail shot, they specifically told us that qualified means qualified in the job you're doing. There's a box out there that all of us as certification agencies have that we qualify in, okay? We qualify you to this box. And it's a large box, and it's a good program, all the programs. I mean, especially NCCER's, because we're partnered with them, I have to say that. But NCCER's got a great qualification program or certification program for riggers. But your responsibility as the employer is to make sure they understand the specific task that they're doing. That's your responsibility, to make them a qualified rigger. If their job every day is in a production facility, which you don't typically do, but in a production facility, and their job is to hook this one piece on and take it off of assembly line and set it over here in the corner, they have to be qualified to do that. That's their job. That makes them a qualified rigger in that box that they're working in. Hanging steel, different box. But you have to be qualified by your employer to do that. So anytime it's assembly, disassembly of a crane, they want someone who's a qualified rigger. There's some other qualifications, like having that qualified person in charge or that assembly, disassembly director that has to be there. Rigging in the fall zone's anywhere where the hook's at. If you pick a load up, it can fall. So the fall zone's anywhere where it's at. So if it's going to be attached in the fall zone, it's got to be a qualified rigger. That means that person has to know how to attach that load, how to balance that load, etc. The level of that is, you know, Steve will talk more about that when he gets into the certification process, but the level of that really is dependent on what the job entails.
I think, Ted, for most steel erectors, that, you know, the basic minimum class like Crosby offers where you know how to inspect wire, rope, sling, nylon, chain if you use them, the basic hitches, you know, the strength of those hitches, sling angle.
Yeah, and simple CGs. Yeah.
You know, we're talking some minimalistic, and it's like you said, the big picture is if you're hook on people, you know, and whoever else is involved in the hook on operation, know those basics, you're in good shape. You can't have a qualified rigger who also does that, plus he goes over here and he jacks 200-ton distillation columns and puts them on Holman rollers. That's a whole different level.
It's another issue. It's a different level of qualification, and each person is going to be qualified in a particular task differently. It's exactly right.
I think a lot of employers are really struggling with what does all that mean, and it's really pretty simple for.
Well, it's a struggle in every industry right now that sees this new construction standard, and it's a struggle whether they fit into it or whether they don't fit into it. You all know where you fit. 99.9% of the time, you're under the 1926 standards. I mean, it's seldom you're going to be in the general industry side. But take a plant, for instance, like a facility that does maintenance. You know, they do maintenance to keep equipment going, and OSHA does not define what maintenance is. It's very gray. But what they've made a couple interpretations, and what they tell you, if you're replacing like for like, unless the size of the job is really large, like for like is maintenance. But if you had to take a structural member, a steel beam out of a building, and you're putting in exactly the same steel beam back in the building, that's not general industry. That becomes construction, because the sheer size of the job, even though if it's tied into the structure of that building, it's now what? Construction. It's not maintenance. They won't consider that. The example they give, one of the examples they give is that steel beam. The other one is a telephone pole. If a power company is out there replacing wooden telephone poles above the ground that they ought to put below, if they're pulling them out and putting them back with a wooden telephone pole, that's maintenance. But if they're putting a new updated hurricane-proof concrete pole in, it's not like for like. It now becomes a construction project. So it's dependent on what you're doing. Qualified signal persons, they did hammer out what the qualifications for a signal person is. They specifically state it. They give you, it's just like operators. They lay out what the operator certification requirement is. They lay the same thing out for signal persons. So qualified signal persons is a big issue in this standard. And I think you kind of alluded to it when you were talking about CDAC, what you expected and what you got. My understanding from several people I know that were on that committee, they were supposed to get a chance to review any changes. And OSHA slid them in, nobody got to see them. So there was no, once it was disbanded, you were done with you.
They called us the day before.
Yep.
Dr. Michaels announced that they were going to put it into effect and said, tomorrow's the big day, you'll be happy.
Yep.
By the way, we put 10 changes in.
Yep.
We'll email them to you.
Yeah, and you can do them on public comment, right? Yeah, that's exactly how they handled it. Signal persons are discussed throughout the 1400 standard. And I'm just going to use the back two digits. In the 1419, that's the general overview of what signals are and when you're required to have a signal person. And essentially, though, the requirement for a qualified signal person is when? Who knows the answer to that? Every time you have a load, you have to have a signal person? No. When the load has a visibility restriction. That's the simplest way to say it. If the operator can't see the load from point A to point B clearly, then you have to use a signal person. So let's say blind lifts or lifts that have a visual issue, or if you're driving the crane and there's a portion of the area that the operator is taking the crane through and they can't see, then you have to have a qualified signal person in there. So what it means is when you're using a signal person, under the criteria that's required, and we'll get to that, it'll be up there, they have to be qualified, and they have to be qualified to certain standards. But not every crane lift requires a signal person. It's no different than it ever has been. Radios, which is 20, voice, which is 21, 22 is signals, hand signals, 28 is the signal person qualifications. Now, there are some significant issues with hand signals. There are some differences between the signals that OSHA has put in and the ASME signals. There's a couple signals missing from the mobile crane signals. Also, in the standard, it allows you to use, new signals or custom signals or special signals. I don't remember what the exact terminology was. Like if you're using a mobile crane and you got a tagline and this means telescope out and this means telescope in, that signal's gone. The only telescope signal is this. You can still use this, you just have to make sure that you communicate it. Qualified rigger is a rigger who meets the qualifications of a qualified person. There's the OSHA's definition of a qualified person. It's the same definition ASME uses, no difference. It's the same definition that anybody that deals with qualified persons uses. ISO, International Standards Organization, uses this same definition. The words are a little different, but essentially it's exactly the same thing. It says it means a person who by possession of a recognized degree or certificate or by professional standing or who by extensive knowledge, training, and experience successfully demonstrated the ability to solve and resolve problems related to the subject matter, the work, or the project. That's the qualified person. That doesn't mean you have to know all-encompassing things about everything. It's that the key is the last sentence, solve and resolve related problems on the subject matter that you're dealing with. How do you document a qualified person? I think last night we were on the side talking a little bit about this, and there are several ways to do it. In this case, it talks about like an engineering degree in their level, in what they're working in. That makes them a qualified person if they successfully complete the testing, etc. Journey level certifications like DOE approved apprentice programs. National certifications like NCCER, CCO, CIC, the others. Steve asked me to take that out of there, but I just, no. I'm just kidding, he didn't. Certificate of training from a nationally, like a national training organization like us or other companies that are out there. Proof of professional standing, resumes, etc. Somebody's been doing this for 30 years. They've got professional standing in what they're doing. You just want to have the documentation. You want to have certificates of training. You want to have training records. You need to have successful completion of a written examination. If you're missing some of those, any of those pieces will fit that portion of proof of training. Proof of experience like work records, resume, or again, a successful completion of a practical exam. You don't have to have all these things. You need a piece of this puzzle and a piece of this puzzle to prove these two things. It's just some examples of what you need. 1419. I don't work in a bank. Good thing because I just transpose numbers, right? It states that a signal person must provide in each of the following situations, or must be provided. The point of operation, meaning the load travel or the area near at load placement that is not in full view of the operator. That's that limited visibility. If you have that limited visibility, then you have to provide that qualified signal person. And as I said earlier, when traveling, if the view of travel is obstructed. Now the last one is the big one though, due to site-specific safety concerns. You may have a site where they don't want anything done without a signal person, period. They may want every lift controlled by a signal person. And then it says, or either the operator or the person handling the load determines that it's necessary. So the site could make it specific, the operator could say, I want a signal person. Even the person doing the signaling or somebody who's responsible for load like the lift director may determine that that's what they want. Employers have to ensure operators are safe and competent. This was effective 11/8/2010. Everything we've looked at so far came into effect November the 8th last year. And it hit hard. You're not the only ones that didn't know what the standard was. You actually got 24 hours notice. The rest of the public got nothing. In November, we asked about the standard. And they said they were under a gag order. They couldn't release the document. They couldn't show it to us. We could not get access to the standard. None of the training companies, none of the consulting firms, no one could get access to that document so that we could at least get prepared for the onslaught that was coming. Because I hadn't seen our phones ring like they started ringing in November the 8th. I mean, it came out in August, but November the 8th, it really started ringing because people realized, oh wow, this took effect today. they only had 90 days anyway. It came out August the 10th or something, or the 4th, I don't remember what it was, but when it came out in August, here's this window that you have to have all this done by. So there was a lot of panic in the industry. So based on that standard, as of November the 8th of last year, you have to still make sure that your people are competent and safe to operate. Not certified yet. Now there are states, as Chip said earlier, there's some states that's got certifications that are a required entity. You have to have your operator certified before you go in those states. Right now we got 4 more years, well not quite 4 years now, until nationwide operators have to be certified. Here's the quandary that I see. California did this back in the 90s, and they gave everybody a 5-year period to meld this in. What do you think everybody did? Yep, 4 years, 6 months. Anybody deal with that California operator issue out there? 4 years, 6 months. The only game in town in those days was CCO. There weren't other companies. They got inundated. I mean inundated. Because these guys had 6 months to get operators certified. The price from the certifiers went from normally $1,200, $1,300 to $5,000, $6,000 a person to get them through testing and training, or training and testing. It was supply and demand. There wasn't enough supply of evaluators, so people were bidding them up. Well, I'll give you more money if you'll cancel with that guy and come with me. Operators who were used to making $22, $23 an hour were making $60 an hour because people couldn't find enough operators. So they would let one company go out and spend all that money and then go up the pay by 10 bucks an hour and take them away. Because your license is what? Portable. Goes with you. If you use one of with the national accrediting bodies. Has to be. It's part of the process. So there was a big problem. I don't think we'll have quite the same problem now because we've got 13 states that already require licensing or certification. So I don't think we'll see the same problem, but I think we'll see little enclaves of states that have the issue where people work maybe in their state and in a couple regions and they don't go out nationally. You know, maybe they only work in 3 states and none of those 3 states have a requirement. So they may wait till 6 months before this and do it. But it's typical to see that accomplished.
The other thing that's going to happen here is that most of your contractors out there now are demanding it because the standard is out.
I think you're right.
You're going to be hard to find contractors.
Well, yeah, and there's most contractors today work nationally, or they work in multi-states, not 1 or 2 states, or just in their counties. And because of that, you're right, Chip. I think you'll see it. As I say, I think you'll see some enclaves where it won't happen, but as a general rule, people are going to have certification and get the process accomplished. But effective November the 10th, 2014, it's required. No way around it. You've got to do it. You have to ensure they're qualified. There's 2 options that really fit the people in this room. There's actually 4 options, but 2 of them aren't applicable to us. One's a government entity and the other is military. I will tell you the government entity, though, if you read that government clause, it really kind of leaves OSHA wide open to be able to do their own program. They could do a national program if they want to, because it allows for a government entity with jurisdiction to do a licensing. Well, OSHA has national jurisdiction. So if you read it, it could happen. I don't see them doing it. They don't have the budget for it. But anyway, you have to ensure they're qualified under 1926-1427A, and the first option is option 1, which is 1427B, and that's to be certified by accredited operator training organization, and there's 3 of the 4. The operating engineers would be the 4th one. The only reason I put other is because by the time this hits the streets 4 years from now, there'll probably be 2 or 3 more. There could very well be, and nobody knows who they'll be or what they'll be. But these types of programs, like NCCER's program, has to be portable, and it can be valid for only 5 years. Now, option 2 is an employer program that it's qualified by an audited employer program. That program would be audited by an entity that already has an accreditation. That's the way the standard is written. I don't know how many of those entities are going to do that. Don't know. But it won't be portable. It won't be a certification. It will say qualification on the card, but it has to be valid for 5 years. So that's an internal program, one where you've gone out and had your own program done. I know there's probably some of you in here that's been involved with one of the organizations, CCO or somebody else, and you probably have some idea of what the programs cost to get done. But if you run all the numbers with all the staff and all the hours and all the psychometrics and all the things that are involved, it'll be way over $500,000 and upwards of 3/4. It is not cheap to get an accredited program done. They audit, they re-audit, they audit again, and then they audit your audit. I mean, it's a...
How about sending your company 25 copies of a book, but they'll certainly send you some things to look at. A couple other things. This PowerPoint, by the way, we'll get to Pamela, we'll post it on your website because there's a lot of good data here and it allows you to go back and educate your management at your companies. The last thing, and I think most important, last year Ted and I did talk a little bit about certification and rigging and regulation as we best knew it at that time. The other thing that we did last year is we had the Crane Rodeo. Well, it's going on again. We've not had a lot of participation, but we've got some great gifts to give away either tonight or tomorrow morning. And at 4 o'clock when they run us all out of the tent, whoever's won, or I think we're doing 2 prizes, the top 2 people get a prize. So there's still an opportunity at the close of it, and I don't want you to all run out right now, but there is an opportunity at the close of this up until 4 o'clock to get on that crane and put it through a short, I think a minute and a half course and see if you can win a prize. So please come by and see us. I am going to breeze through a lot of these because I want to leave you time to ask questions. But we all know why we train. We see reductions in first aid cases, reductions in total recordable incident rate, improvements in attendance, reductions in turnover. We, with the National Construction Users Roundtable and the Construction Industry Institute, put together a research project on productivity. And these are the kind of results that we got from that. So it's obvious that if you are training, as many of you do, then you should be seeing results like this. One of the more important results that you should be seeing is that reduction in total recordable incident rate, which in turn will provide you lower comp rates, and you can bid more competitively and put more money back into the investment of training, is what I would like to say. Talk a little bit about your ironworker curriculum that we have just finished. First of all, level 2, as Chip said, will be available in July. The third and the last level will be available January 1st of next year. Now, in a traditional ironworker apprenticeship, and I'm speaking to the choir, but we already have the welding curriculum completed. We have copies of that over at our booth. We have also already finished, and I know this for some of you is about as bad as a carpenter talking to you. We have reinforcing ironwork, a brand new curriculum out there. So for those of you that are ironworkers that do both, and have a traditional apprenticeship where you teach both reinforcing ironwork and structural and ornamental, then we've got all of that available for you. But this is just some examples of the different things that are available in this book. We do have it available in Spanish. Unfortunately, it's not available in color for probably another year. And our intention, and we've talked to a few people about it, is to put this online to where you have an online resource. Yes, Chip? We are making revisions to our carpentry curriculum, and a part of that, associated primarily with the rigging side of the house, is going to be tilt-up and precast concrete. We've also just completed a 3-level rigging program to include a 3-level rigging certification that we'll be making application to ANSI. We've already begun the application process. So as Ted talked about, 3 levels of rigging: basic, intermediate, advanced. I'm going to show you those in a minute. Signal person, and also precast concrete. Why do we certify? I don't need to dwell on this other than to say that now that we have to certify, then you should be reaping the results, such as improved safety. You've got an opportunity to have favorable insurance rates, as we talked about a minute ago, and it provides professional status to your workers. The written assessment categories for our certification are those. The 2 primary, let's call them, are your telescopic boom and your lattice boom. And then with that, we have 4 practical examination categories. Now, so that seems like you could only have 4 certifications or licenses, but with these 4 written and 4 practicals, we actually have a matrix that by taking multiple practicals that you can actually be licensed or certified on up to 13 different types of equipment that are all B30.5 standard related. But on top of that, as Ted talked about, we're tracking on our practical examinations the capacity of the actual rig that you take your practical on. So we are showing capacity. One of the nice things with our program is you're able to go out onto the internet within minutes of scoring this test. So if you take it and in 15 minutes after this test result has been faxed in to our testing agency, your recorded type of license and capacity will be out there on the internet and available to look at. We have gone basically to a virtual wallet card as opposed to continuing to have to change out cards. This was in the Crane hotline that many of you probably get, and it's probably not a very clear picture, but that just came out. They actually interviewed Graham, myself, Steve Brown with the Iron Workers, and Debbie Dickinson, and they came up with a matrix of the different costs. Obviously, there are different components to the cost. This will be available on your website so you can do some comparisons. Please understand that cost shopping may not necessarily provide you the best program that will meet your needs, but there's a cost comparison. And then I know this is even more difficult to see, but it shows you of the 4 accredited organizations all of the different types of licenses for both crane operators, riggers, and signal persons, as well as other things such as crane inspectors, tower cranes, and other type of lifting and hoisting devices. Our rigging and signal person assessment certification program, once again, 3 levels to include signal person, and we're applying for ANSI accreditation as we speak. The basic rigger, I want to talk about this just a minute, and on our website you can find the specifications for all of our different testing mechanisms, but we're going to cover communications, crane operations, different types of lifting equipment, rigging practices, and then certainly the safety and emergency procedures. As you advance from basic to intermediate, you obviously have to know all of the previous certification requirements. So as you move to intermediate, you'll not only be tested on the basic information, but you'll have more in-depth questions about communication, crane operations, lifting criteria to include effects of angles, capacity calculations, personnel lifting. You get into more equipment, you get into more rigging practices to include blind lifting, and even more safety, particularly around electrical hazards. As you move to the advanced certification, not only do you have to know the basic and the intermediate, but then you have to go into even more advanced titles, and those are shown there. Obviously, the more you know, the tighter the text gets on the slide. So I'll just commit that we will give this to Pamela so we can get this on your website. We'll also post it to our website, so this PowerPoint will be available for you to go up to either one of the 2 websites to see. Signal person certification areas. You heard Ted and you also heard Chip talk about the different requirements as per the regulation. Our signal person certification topic areas are inclusive of all the different communication means, as well as Ted talked about, you've got to know more about the actual crane operation than a typical qualification of a signal person. And from a safety perspective, very similar to the advanced rigging topics. We do have at our booth over there a rigging box that actually can be used with all 3 of the rigging certifications. We partnered with Crosby Rigging and also with Industrial Splicing. They actually have provided all of their materials and equipment for us and have actually put it into a nice little neat box that has wheels on it, and it can be shipped from job to job. So you can actually do all of your certifications instead of going to a pre-engineered location. You can do them on your job sites, you can do them in your fabrication shop, you can do all of this there. Similarly, once again, we have a crane rodeo going on. I would ask you to go over and take a shot at that. You can sure beat the 16 minutes that it took me to get through the course. So I know somebody's going to win out there besides me. And Ted also has those for sale. He's got a great price. I can remember when crane simulators came out, I was working with Fluor for 20 years, and back in the early 90s, we had an organization come by with a tractor trailer, and they wanted $1.2 million for their crane simulator. So you can certainly get that now, and Ted will be glad to talk to you about that price. We have a tower crane assessment that is available, and that will be become a certification for which we have already begun the ANSI application, and it will cover the Luffer, the Hammerhead, and the Fast Erect type tower cranes. And wow, that's much too much verbiage. It'll be on our website, but those are all the topic areas. There are the specifications and the number of questions asked related to all of those topic areas. And Ed Valencia, a big thank you to you for all the help you've done to help us. Ed is on our National Safety Committee too. Once again, portability of records. You can go on our website, you can look up any certifications, any training that you've taken, and we have all sorts of credentials that are available and portable from company, I know you don't like to hear this, company to company and state to state. The advantage of this program and any third-party accredited program is that certification is not owned by the company, but it's owned by your employee or your trainee. So it is portable credentials. With that, I've left us about 25 minutes, Chip, so I think this is the best time of a conference like this. It gives you a chance to ask questions to the 2 experts. It gives you a chance to even help us answer some of the things that you may be doing right that we haven't learned about yet. So let me pass on the microphone to one of you, if that's okay. Chip?